You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, welcome back to the Cricket Podcast. This is the third instalment of our 8-team preview, if you like, of the IPL 2021. So far, we've talked about the Rajasthan Royals and about the Chennai Super Kings. Next up is the team that has changed their name for reasons unbeknown to me. It is the Kings Punjab, or the Punjab Kings.
The Punjab Kings.
Kings 11 Punjab. The 11 Kings of Punjab.
Legends?
Yes. The legends. The Kings 11 legend. Oh, my goodness. That's a great way to start a segment. A little bit on Punjab first, because we do like to set the scene for where these cricket teams would be playing if we were in a normal world. Obviously, they're doing sort of a grand tour of India instead of playing in their home grounds. But if they were playing at home, they would be playing in Punjab. That is another state in the north of India, a land famous for its rivers. Indeed, as the three Persian speakers on this video will know, Punjab is actually derived from two Persian words, Panj, 5, and Ab, water, because of the 5 rivers in the region. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, it's also home to the most visited site on the planet, the Golden Temple in Amritsar. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
This is the bit that I just love about a cricket podcast. You wouldn't get this on a football podcast, would you? You're not going round and going, oh, and here's the 10 sites you want to see in Scotland when you're talking about Rangers and Celtic. This is great. What more have you got for me, Jack, on the tourism front?
I haven't got anything. I did it. Well, here's something I do know, actually. The cricket stadium, the PCA stadium, is the 8th best thing to do in Punjab. So there are actually 7 better things to do if you're in Punjab than watch this team, which is pretty good. Last year, the Punjab Kings, the artists formerly known as Kings 11 Punjab, as Ross talked about very confusingly in the intro. They had a really interesting season. They were absolutely dreadful for the first half. Then they made some changes, recalled Chris Gale, and suddenly they were unstoppable. On Twitter, we started calling them the Comeback Kings 11.
Better name.
At the Cricket Pod, by the way.
Doesn't work now, does
it? And then, as they stood on the precipice of glory, we thought they were going to make it to the playoffs for the first time in years. They needed 1 win from 2 games. Everything was coming down. KL Rahul, King legend Rahul. And they disintegrated. They lost both matches, including 1 game to Chennai Super Kings, and finished 6th, which was very disappointing, wasn't it, Max?
I was convinced that they were going to do it. We'd been panning them for ages. Chris Gale came back and suddenly they just won everything. And if I'm not mistaken, the last 2 games as well, where they needed to get points, were against teams below them in the table. It was against the also Rans, and you were looking at their rivals for that final spot were looking then like being Sunrisers, who had to face Delhi Capitals and Mumbai. So it was nailed on. They were there. They were going to do it, and then obviously go on and win. It's the IPL wine mixer, baby.
It was really sad. Particularly they won that double super over where KL Rahul failed to chase 3 or something like that. Anyway, the key men in the leadership group, Anil Kumble, he's a big boy of Indian cricket. Andy Flower is his assistant. I think if Andy Flower is ever your assistant, you've made it in whatever your field is, haven't you? I mean, that's a proper assistant. Ross, you're laughing away there. Do you reckon you could boss around Andy Flower?
I'm just kind of picturing me and him on like an episode of MasterChef, and him just doing nothing what has been told in terms of him being a sous chef, and then out cooking me. I can imagine he's better in almost every way to the majority of people he's an assistant to, except for Anil Kumble.
Yeah, And he has to defer to the leg spinning legend. They're captained by KL Rahul, King Legend Rahul, as he calls himself, and we're not making that up. That's how he refers to himself. Dinesh Karthik confirmed that. They play in one of the least loud kits in the IPL, grey strides with a red top. Players. I think, I'm just going to throw this out there. I think they've got a pretty good team. Dan, let's just hear from you first, and then we'll get into a little bit of detail. But just if you were going to judge this squad overall, I would say like above average.
I think that they have a better chance than last year. I think that they've still got holes, but they look a far better squad than they did in 2020 season. And I think they're probably one of the big winners in the auction. They had a big budget to spend, and they spent some of it, a good chunk of it, on Jhye Richardson, who for me looks like a really good acquisition, even though he was expensive in terms of being a two bowler, 2 power play, 2 death bowler, a guy who can come in at the death and give it a smack as well. He's got a really good death strike rate over the last couple of years. But then they also spent 4.2 crore on Moises Henriquez, which to me is extremely bizarre because
I'm better than Moises Henriquez. That's what I've decided.
I mean, he's hit around 14% of boundaries in T20 in the last 3 years and has a pretty mediocre bowling output. So I just don't see the logic there at all. And again, you look at Dawid Malan at 1.5 crore. Now, he's a good player. We've had many debates about Dawid Malan and whether he merits this world number 1 status, etc. But I don't see how he gets in this Kings 11 team without really unbalancing it. And I don't see that they need another player who starts slowly when they've already got Chris Gale, who likes to start slowly, and Ross's best friend, KL Rahul, as well.
The ball eater.
Yeah. So I just don't see how he fits into that squad. I think he would have been a good signing for maybe a couple of other teams, but not Kings 11. So yeah, they've got holes still, like I say, but they've also made some big strides, I think. I like their recruitment, maybe like a 7 out of 10 maybe for recruitment.
Well, that's better than some teams. It's a lot better than some teams. Yeah. So on those players, if you look at the squad in a whole, including the guys who were there last year, we've got names like KL Rahul, Agarwal, Chris Gale, Nicholas Pooran, Ravi Bishnoi, Mohammed Shami. The 2 Aussie pacers they've added, Riley Meredith and Jhye Richardson, should give them a little bit more, firepower in an area which they were pretty poor in 2020. Max, we didn't really come to you on that question about how good the squad is. Do you reckon if you were a Neil Kumble or Andy Flower, if he's deferred the job to Andy Flower, do you reckon you'd be happy with that as like a core bunch of players for your team?
As you said, I would be happier than last year because of that key acquisition of Jhye Richardson, which just gives them that lower order hitting and also something to use at the death where they were famously terrible last year. But I think they might be a batsman light in the middle order. That's my feeling. I would be almost tempted to do something like drop Jordan and bring in Fabian Allen or something a little left field, because I think they just need that one extra bit. Sort of, I don't know, a kind of a Glenn Maxwell kind of figure in that sort of middle area. That's the kind of player that I think they could use. And obviously, he didn't perform last year and he was very expensive. But that's the kind of thing that I think is just missing from them being real contenders.
I think I'd probably agree with that. Although I would maybe contend that their batting lineup they should be able to put out. So if you've got KL Rahul and Agarwal opening the batting, Chris Gale at 3 or some combination.
Yeah, I suppose they're the only people that are going to bat, aren't they? That'll be 164.
Well, that's part of it, and then Nicholas Pooran after that as well is another sort of world class operator. So you would think that you should, across a season, get enough productivity out of those players to regularly post par totals, Ross.
Yeah, I think so, and I think there is a real bit here where I think they've just got a bit of a better balance they did last year in their bowling lineup. So it's always focused when Chris Gale's part of the conversation. The guy is coming up to being 45, and so there is a bit where how long can he continue to Chris Gale for? But Chris Gale believes that he can Chris Gale forever, so that is a great thing for Kings 11.
He's only 41, Ross. He's got a good 5 years left in the tank.
But when they're having, you have to hide Chris Gale in the field. He was like short, fine leg, short third man kind of bit. And even then, some of those positions, more and more, players can hit the ball there really quite hard. So there is a bit where how much you need to sacrifice. But throughout his career, he has been definitely in the positives in terms of player impact and batting impact. I think from a bowling point of view, Jack, I think they've actually got the bowlers to defend some of those totals now that they get themselves into. I thought Arshdeep Singh bowled really well last year, and I'd be surprised not to see him in the lineup. Riley Meredith with his he had a better tash than I do from like I had last year, but he's exciting, right? And Mohammed Shami's coming back from injuries, had time to prepare. I think that's a huge bonus for having someone like him back, combined with Jhye Richardson.
There are question marks at the time of recording, which is still a couple of weeks from the IPL, about whether
Ross's tash earlier in the year.
About whether Mohammed Shami will make the beginning of the IPL. But yeah, when he does come back, he's an absolute quality operator. I'm mainly looking forward to seeing Nicholas Pooran. I think over 2019-2020, he scored more than 1,500 runs in T20 cricket at an average of about 35, striking at 155. That is, for a number 4, they're big numbers, big numbers. And hopefully we get some Pooran fireworks, as we saw in the T10 league. Actually, I mean, there won't be any farmers bowling to him, so it won't be as easy. But but he can really get hold of it. Young stars, Ross, you just mentioned Arshdeep Singh. The other one I'd throw in, Ravi Bishnoi. Now, both of those, I think, broke out last year. Like they're kind of known quantities, but I reckon this season they have the potential again to elevate their sort of game to another tier. Do you reckon?
Well, so normally when I talk about young Indian players, I speak with my heart rather than my head. And Dan, you're a more head than heart kind of operator. What do you think about Ravi Bishnoi and Arshdeep Singh, and even Ishan Parel as well?
That was beautifully deflected, by the way.
I'm a canny operator as well, don't you worry.
It was interesting that you guys mentioned Arshdeep Singh and Ravi Bishnoi as the 2 breakout stars potentially, because in my notes for this podcast, I actually put 2 different names as breakout stars for Kings 11. So that's pretty positive in that perhaps we spoke about Rajasthan in the previous pod about maybe they haven't got the young players quite ready to play in the team yet, but I think Kings 11 could have. So Ishan Parel, I thought it was bizarre that they didn't play him last year. Max mentioned earlier about their very poor bowling numbers generally. So when they had a local player on the bench who just didn't get game time, who'd done really well in the Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy before the IPL. And in fact, Parel has taken 20 wickets at an average of 14 in the last 2 years in Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy. Now, that doesn't qualify him to get into one of the worst bowling teams in the entire competition. I'm not sure what does. So I would love to see Ishan Parel get some good game time this year and show what he's made of. I wrote about him in my book as a player to watch, and I was really disappointed he didn't play last year. So I'm hoping that the Kings 11 think tank rectify that in the coming tournament. And the other player that I want to see play a bit more, and I think one of you guys mentioned earlier about the sort of lower middle order of Kings 11 being a bit ropey. And I'm not a massive fan of, say, like a 5-6 of Mandeep Singh and Deepak Hooda, for example. I just don't see that it's particularly explosive and has a lot of upside in terms of strike rate. So I wonder whether Prabh Singh might get a bit more game time as well. Now, he made his debut when he was 18. I think he got bought for quite a lot of money when he was 18. And I think that was probably too soon. But I think there's some growing evidence to suggest that he's actually more ready now at 20. In the recent Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy, hit 341 runs at an average of 85, not bad, and a strike rate of 142. So just 20 years of age. So they're really promising numbers for Prabh Singh. And he offers another wicket-keeper option, although they've already got two in the first 11 already with Carroll Hill and Nicholas Paran. So I think
It's a good slip, Corden.
Yeah, very, very much. Doesn't Gale field at slip as well?
Unfortunately, yes.
One player I don't know much about, and Dan, I think we did talk about him after the auction. Sold for a lot of money. Shah Rukh Khan. What does he do? Just to enlighten us.
Good question. I need to refer to some notes.
We are talking about the cricketer here, by the way.
not the Bollywood film star. Yeah.
He bowls off
he's an
breaks,
actor.
doesn't he?
Let me have a look.
I think he bowls
There
right
was-
off his.
There was a great video of him. I think it was him getting told, or the team he was playing with getting told that he'd been picked up in the IPL for lots of money on their team bus, jetting around somewhere.
Probably going to that bus terminal in Chennai.
While Dan's looking that up to enlighten us, English players Max and Ross, Dawid Malan and Chris Jordan. Do you expect them to play, Max?
I expect one of them to play. It'll probably be Chris Jordan. They seem to be quite keen on picking him, and he has the odd game, doesn't he, where he makes everyone think that he's really good at death bowling, and then also has the odd game where suddenly it looks like he hasn't got a clue how to do death bowling. So interesting with Chris Jordan. You often don't know what you're going to get, but they seem to be quite happy with him and pick him quite often. And as we've already mentioned, it's probably unlikely that Dawid Malan is going to play. He doesn't really fit in with what they need and how many overseas players they've got. But it's nice for him that he got a contract, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a nice little lockdown holiday.
So I think that he shouldn't really get a look in, if I'm perfectly honest. So I think Riley Meredith actually is probably going to be a better option. He's something a little bit different.
Chris Jordan, that is, yeah.
Yeah, but he's a little bit different than Dawid Malan. But there's also Puran. He needs to play. Jhye Richardson needs to play. They're probably going to have to stick with Chris Gale after his heroics from last year. But if not, then you're looking for a kind of a better option, and probably Fabian Allen, as you mentioned before, might be a better fit, especially when they're looking for a bit more batting. I think they've improved their bowling unit. So I'm just not sure Jordan's going to play, and I'm not sure Dawid Malan is going to get a look in over anyone who gets injured. Really, it's probably the only opportunity.
Dan, did you get to the bottom of the Shah Rukh Khan?
I certainly did. He's almost 26 years old, so it's pretty late to be kind of recruited to play in the IPL. And I think that we talked a bit earlier about Mandeep Singh and Deepak Hooda not being particularly explosive with the bat. And Shah Rukh Khan certainly is, in terms of he doesn't leave the pitch wondering if he should have had a little bit more intent, that's for sure. So he hits almost 20% of balls faced for boundaries in T20 with a really good 4-6 ratio as well. So if you divide the number of fours by the number of sixes and it's less than 2, which his is, then that's really, really quite strong in terms of that 6 hitting bias and that extra intent. But the problem with him is that he doesn't really last very long. So he has about 14 balls per dismissal at a lower level. So you would assume that, generally speaking, with T20 cricket, players are much better at maintaining strike rate and intent when they step up in level, but they just get out more often. So I can see maybe like quite a few like 18, 20 runs off 10 balls type innings from this guy. I think that's going to be what they've recruited him for. And actually, I would probably go as far as to say that that's probably needed more in their group at 5 or 6. As you said, the top 4 might take the lion's share of the balls, so they want someone who can just come in and give it a whack lower down. But I don't expect him to last long, and maybe he makes Abdul Samad look a stability orientated player, if that makes sense.
Sounds like he's disappointed plenty of batting partners in his past, so long may that continue.
It's got a nice launch angle. Historically, the Kings 11, as they used to be called, or the Punjab Kings, as they haven't yet played as, but we're just going to use those interchangeably because we're never going to remember, are we? Let's face it. They have finished, so there have been 13 IPL seasons. They've played them all. They have finished outside of the playoffs on 11 occasions, which is pretty good when half the teams make the playoffs every year. That's a commitment to subpar performance. They last appeared in the playoffs in 2014, where they actually finished as runners-up, before immediately finishing last again in 2015. Before I tell you the odds, Ross, how do you think they'll get on?
I actually think they've got a good squad here, and I think from the excitement from following them last year, they're one of those. It's difficult sometimes to build an affinity with an IPL team or any franchise cricket for that matter. This one, they're a little bit captivating, and I think they have the players to actually challenge. And I think they will make the playoffs, and I do think they've got the match winners in the side to actually challenge the big teams as well.
Max, the odds are 10 or 11 to 1. They're actually the long shot with the bookies in the UK. Would you be tempted to take a punt at 10 to 1 on the Punjab Kings?
Absolutely. That is the best value available on the betting market from my point of view for the IPL 2020. Sponsored by no one yet, but
I think the only thing that could let them down. So, fellas, how are you with your communist thinkers? Antonio Gramsci? No, I'm guessing there's a lot of blank faces looking back at me. There's a famous phrase from him. The old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. And I think this is a juncture in the Kings 11 Punjab Kings history. I think we've reached that juncture. The old Kings 11 are dying, but I think the Punjab Kings might be struggling to be born, if that makes sense. I'm not sure what they'll do with all these players. I'm not sure whether the Kumble Andy Flower dynamic will hold together, or whether Andy Flower's prodigious ego will take over and sink the ship. I'm not sure whether KL Rahul will, win the orange cap and also score a reasonable run rate. So I think, I reckon they'll just make the playoffs, but go out in the first round. Dan, does that sound like a reasonably fair appraisal?
Yeah, and I think that probably would represent progress for them as well from last year. I actually think that they've got a decent shout to come in top four. But I think a lot depends on how they structure up and whether they make the right decisions. Like you said earlier, that think tank and making those maximum efficiency decisions is critical. They've got holes in their squad, no doubt about that. They really lack an aggressive hitter as an all-rounder, and they let one go. And also, they don't really have an elite leg spinner, a real proven quantity as a leg spinner as well. And they're kind of, a lot of the time, they're two prerequisites for success in T20 in terms of team building. So that's a bit of a hurdle that they've got to overcome. Yeah, I think they can come top four. And then after that, if they can get themselves into, say, like a 40-60 or a 45-55 matchup against someone, they've got the chance of progression too. So, yeah, fairly confident about their chances.
So after all that positive stuff, I think we all kind of agree on, it sounds like a consensus has formed among us that they're going to be one of those teams, and I said this in the CSK preview, that they're going to try and get par with the bat regularly, and they're probably going to rely on their bowling to get them out of those situations or to bowl them to victory. I guess the questions around that, Max, is if you're facing them, you're the captain of the opposition team. Do you think that either of those facets can be targeted? Do you think you can stop them scoring par, or do you think that their bowling is maybe targetable in some way?
I think I'd probably say the easiest thing to do is maybe stop them scoring par. If you can get a couple of early wickets in that power play, you're then sort of bringing in that middle order, which maybe might be more oriented to quick fire runs, and if they're in early and required to build an innings, there's a risk there that they could fall short. I think they may have succumbed to a couple of situations like that in the previous year. I think their bowling looks pretty strong. There's always opportunity for people to have off days, but I think a strong power play up front would be a good platform. If you can get those people out early who like to build their innings, then as we've spoken about before, it's all very well if you score 80 off 60, but if the first 20 of those is 20 off 20 and you get out after that, then it becomes a problem.
I am looking forward to seeing KL Rahul bat for the first 10 overs and then being ordered to hit his own stumps because he can't accelerate. I think that should be the team orders in Formula One. I think team orders should happen in cricket a little bit more often, and the captain's sacrifice might be something we get to see.
We've got time for a couple of Twitter questions. Blimey, I don't know what happened there. Vinay asks, and Dan, I think I know the answer to this, but it's kind of the big question for them this season. Have the Kings made a mistake by releasing Maxwell?
Yeah, I think so, because they lack that skill set. So they don't really have an off spinner in their batting group unless you use the very occasional Chris Gale, and so that leaves them quite exposed against teams who are left-hander happy. So that's a slight issue, and obviously he's got that explosive hitting as well. He didn't really deliver. He hasn't really delivered consistently in the IPL in recent years, but I'm unconvinced as to whether that's not just variance, really. Short seasons a lot of the time. He's shown he can do it around the world, so why can't he do it in the IPL? I don't know. Yeah, I think that I probably would have either looked to retain Maxwell, buy him back at a cheap price, which wouldn't have manifested itself anyway. I just think that if you're comparing him to, I've got Gale, Paran, and Richardson as three nailed-on overseas players in their squad.
Yeah,
and I'm a bit uninspired by the choice of the other five. I'm very uninspired by Chris Jordan at this level. Meredith has still got a lot to prove, and he's not really a death bowler either. Henriquez we've already talked about. Malan we've already talked about. And Fabian Allen is a hitter with not massive bowling output. So I think that there is a Maxwell space in their overseas slots for him. And I probably would have kept him.
Dan, so sorry to jump into that, but is there sometimes a bit where teams suffer because of the big name player, and actually by getting rid of Maxwell they might have a bit the team might be a little bit closer together? You're not actually relying on, don't worry, Glenn Maxwell will hit the runs, and when he inevitably hits no 60s in the whole of the IPL, it's not a major shock to a franchise like Kings 11.
I don't know. I'm not sure if I buy into that at this level. I don't know what Maxwell's like in terms of his personality and stuff, so that's really difficult to say. But no, I think you just pick your best players in these tournaments most of the time. The tournaments are so short. If you can't, even if there are a couple of, like, say, difficult personalities in the group, you're there for 6 weeks. Just get on with it. Alex Ferguson managed to do that famously at Man United for best part of 20 years. So in terms of managing those complex personalities and getting the most out of maverick players, and I think that the cricket teams probably should do that same thing as well. So now I've got no issue with Maxwell being at Kings 11, and I think that they look poorer team without him. And when you look at their overseas choices, disregarding the fact that I probably would have released Jordan and I wouldn't have bought Henriquez and I would have not paid that much for Riley Meredith, that it gives you the budget to sign Maxwell and like a Adam Milne or a Mustafizer or something like that instead. So you could have messed around with the budget a little bit differently and I think got better results.
Like, last question then, Max, you get the honour of finishing the Kings segment or the Kings preview. Galsum asks, would it be better if Punjab Kings cease to operate?
Well, that's a bit of a harsh question, isn't it? No, I don't think it would, because then how would we complain about KL Rahul eating balls if they didn't exist anymore? They're important for the future of the cricket podcast.
A wonderful answer. You can tweet us at the Cricket Pod, etc. The next preview we'll be doing is Kolkata Knight Riders, but we will take a break now.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
I think it was a disgraceful performance, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again.
That is very good.